There we go.
Okay, so this is kind of historically what I think of when I think wood scraper, where I've got these two cross pieces. This then attaches to either the floor or drives into the ground, and then I can take my boot and scrape on it. So rather than do all that, what I'm wondering is if I can just have, effectively, I can just get rid of this and just have it come across and go down into the ground, and there's my boot scraper. Does that make sense?
And James wants it to be music note shaped.
Music note shaped. So, there was a, back in the time, there was a civilization of the Greeks. The Greeks were very powerful at the time, and they didn't just have one god, they had lots of gods. So they had the god of hunting and the god of agriculture and the god of storms, and and they had the god of blacksmithing. And the god of blacksmithing, his name was Hephaestus. And Hephaestus made Athena's spear, and Zeus's thunderbolts, and Ares' sword, and all kinds of stuff. But he didn't work by himself. He had a race of apprentices that were made for him by the gods. And those apprentices were a kind of giant called a cyclops. Now, what's the predominant feature of a cyclops? They have one eye. The reason that cyclopses only had one eye is because they didn't wear safety glasses. You will never see a picture of a cyclops wearing safety glasses. No matter how many pictures of cyclopses you see, none of them wear safety glasses. That's why they ended up with one eye. So if you want to have two eyes, wear your safety glasses. And again, that's the kind of story that's entertaining, but that's hopefully teaching a lesson of some kind. And there's probably some truth to that story. Some. A lot of blacksmiths probably did lose eyes back in the days when glasses and safety glasses wasn't the thing. And so you got the story of the Cyclops. They also had a mythical being back then called the centaur. A centaur is man from the top, horse from the bottom. Well, if you're from a civilization that's never seen men riding horses, because that's a relatively new concept, men riding a horse. Certainly into battle, it's pretty new in relative terms. We've been around for 100,000 years. Almost everything's new. Well, if you haven't seen it before and you see it from a distance, the concept that the man is riding the horse is a little weird to you. But if you see it from a distance, it looks like one thing. It looks like it's a centaur. It looks like it's a half man, half horse. So probably a lot of these stories came out of something. So this is what we would probably call a jelly roll, where I'm kind of rolling it up nice and tight all the way. What you want to do when you're doing a jelly roll is to make sure there's no gaps. There's no gaps in here. There's no air. If you've got air in here, you've got to kind of unwind it. It's got to be tight the whole way. Alright, so we'll continue. And again, I'm going to hang a little bit off. And I'm going to come into myself and keep forcing it down so that I don't get that gap. If I give you a little bit of a gap, I can close it by hitting it this way. You want to be, in general, careful about how much effort or how much force you're applying when you're hitting back into yourself. If you're hitting back into yourself, you're going to hurt your wrist, and if you line it up wrong, you're going to hurt something even more. So you got to be careful how you're doing that. Now, just because they're here doesn't mean they're interested.
Yeah. No, they started it and left to do laundry.
Yeah.
So I still need to make sure I got left enough for that. I think that's as far as I want to jelly roll that. So there was one time there was this barber who was working away. He was in kind of a a new small town. So he was introducing himself to his latest customer, and his customer said that he was a woodworker, a carpenter. And the barber said, well, you know, I've always really respected people who are craftsmen, people who spend their time and make things that look nice with their hands, that are not only beautiful but functional as well. And I've always kind of thought of myself as a craftsman. So, you know, I'm not just randomly cutting your hair. I'm trying to make it look nice and be functional. So I'll tell you what, one craftsman to another, this haircut's free. And the carpenter goes, oh, I like that. That's pretty good, right? So, and then the next day when the barber came into the shop, there sitting on the front stoop of his shop was this little stool, beautifully made, dovetail, cherry wood, gorgeous. So he gave it to his young daughter, and he says, wow, isn't this great? And then later on, he was talking to one of his customers, and it turned out that customer did pottery. And he said, you know what? I've always really respected people who are craftsmen. So I'll tell you what, one craftsman to another, this haircut's free. Oh, isn't that great? Next day he comes into the shop, and there sitting on his front stoop is this beautiful bowl. And it's got all kinds of fancy glazing colors, and it's perfectly symmetrical, and it's just beautiful. And so he gives it to his wife, and he thinks, oh, this is just working out great. And then later on in the day, he's talking to one of his customers, and it turns out that customer is a blacksmith. And he says, you know what? Same spiel, one craftsman to another, this haircut's free.
Can you show us what you just did? You're off camera.
What did I just do? I was off camera. So
yes.
I put this part in the vise, and then I put my twisting wrench on here, which is now tightened up, and then turned. Now, my twisting wrench, or as I say during my demonstrations, my historically authentic twisting wrench,
chrome plated.
you can make this if you want to. It's hard to make them adjustable. But you can just take a piece of steel and go like this. Now you've got two twisting wrenches. But what you really want is two handles. If you've only got one handle, it's going to corkscrew on you and do all sorts of horrible things. If you've got two, you're going to smoothly transition while you're twisting, and the piece won't end up going on a walk. So two handles. I don't care how you get there with two handles. So that's the important part.
Sorry.
Great. How did my story end? Yes. So the blacksmith.
Oh.
So the blacksmith, he goes in, talks to his customer. Turns out his customer is the blacksmith. One craftsman to another. This haircut's free. Oh, isn't that great? Comes in the next day, and there sitting on his front stoop are three more blacksmiths. I told you blacksmiths were cheap, didn't I? I told you we were cheap. Yeah, yeah. We'll see what we can do.
Not that.
Not that. Easy to find the right pair. So I want to go this way. Like that. Stephen's random hole in the middle of it.
Perfect. It's perfect spacing. Right where you need the strength.
So what I'm trying to judge is where I want to cut it. So I probably want to go about there. Then again, if it's going to function as a boot scraper, function is important. See how agile I am here. I probably want, yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Now these two met my dog on the way in. His name's Miko. Miko is part Border Collie, part Australian Shepherd. But you can tell that he's a blacksmith's dog. Because whenever he gets in trouble, if I look at him sternly, he makes a bolt for the door.
Oh!
Yeah. Cut through this. And start long. It's easier to take more off than it is. Add more on. So I don't want to cut all the way through. I'm gonna wreck my hammer. So I'm gonna cut most of the way through. So here's another story you can tell. So instead of cutting this through or using a fancy tool, I'm going to use a very sophisticated industrial technique to get that piece off. So this is called work hardening. So how many people in the audience have done work hardening? And then I stare around and everybody goes, "Oh, I've never done work hardening." And I go, "Okay, let me ask you a seemingly unrelated question. Have you ever had a can of pop? Put your hands up if you've had a can of pop." And everybody puts their hand up. And I go, "Then you lied to me. You have done work hardening." So when you take the tab on the can of pop, if you wiggle it, it eventually comes off, right? Well, what's happening when you do that? Because the steel is cold, or coldish, every time you bend it, which is also called working, every time I work it, it's going to get harder because it's cold. If you bend steel while it's cold, it gets harder. And every time it gets harder, it gets weaker, more brittle. Remember we talked about when things are hard, they get brittle? Well, the harder it gets, the more brittle it gets, until eventually it breaks. So that's work hardening. Now you can fix that by annealing it, but if you don't fix it, it just keeps on getting harder. So if you've got a spoon at home, and the bowl of the spoon has sagged, if you go, I'll fix it, I'll just bend it back. What did you do? You work hardened it. So you made it more brittle. Now blacksmiths, we don't like making things more brittle. We want them to stay nice and strong. So that's why we bend stuff while it's hot. If you bend stuff while it's hot, it doesn't get brittle. It stays nice and strong. So things that are made through forging processes, through blacksmithing processes, are typically a lot stronger than things that are made by using them when they're cold. So now we're going to make this a bit of a mix between the level of artisticness we want, the level of realism we want, and the level of functionality we want. So this is not a pure representation of a musical note.
Yeah, all right. Yeah. How about sideways?
So this is a bit too exaggerated for a music note, and it's a bit too fanciful for a music note. But it's also curved, and if I had a real boot scraper, I would probably want it straight. So I'm compromising on all those things to create a result that I want at the end of the day. So it isn't, you're never going to get the perfect compromise between art and functionality, but you got to do what you can. So normally I do this in a vise.
This looks scary, so why don't you do it in a vise?
That will cheat.
Alright.
So what this is going to do is create a crease in there that I'll have to fix later. But I can get rid of that bend. And then I can bring it down over here. We'll get there. Clean that transition up. So where that twist happened, it got a little ugly. So we're just cleaning that up in there. So there's a reason that a lot of machinists use ball peen hammers. So if you've got a round end on it, you can clean up things a lot easier. It'll find those little high points and hit them a lot better than a square face will. I think I can live with that. So as another line you can use when you're talking to people or doing demonstrations. So I always say, give you something to do while you're doing this part. I always say if you're a woodworker and you want to be accurate, you measure things down to the 64th of an inch. If you're a machinist and you want to be accurate, you measure things down to the tens of thousandths of an inch. If you're a blacksmith and you want to be accurate, you hold stuff up in the air and try to decide if it's straight. That's our version of heaven. So that'll get you a laugh, and it'll also help people understand what you're doing. Why am I just randomly holding this? So there's our piece. We'll hold it up one more time.
There you go.
Somewhere.
Oh, okay, up a bit.
Up a bit.
There, perfect.
There we are. So again, what we could do, put a base on that, and then attach it to the floor. Put a post underneath it, something like that. Or again, you could have a piece come out this way and screw it into the floor, whatever works. Do what you think is appropriate.